Hello everyone. We're going to continue by covering some R basics. And the first set of basics we're going to talk about are using R to use commands and calculations. The reading for this video is going to be from Learning Statistics with R, sections 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4. Notice they're linked right here. And of course, here's the link to this lecture that we're talking about right now. So we'll get started with section 3.2. And I'm going to click on there, come on over here. This is the actual textbook, 3.2. Click on that link, and then if you click on the big link, it'll make this big. We've talked about that in other videos, but here we are. Everything is right here. Now you can either print this or buy a copy of it, a printed copy of it, but you don't need to because it's all right here. And in fact, I think this might actually be easier because there's places where you may want to say copy and paste. All right, we can go in and we can copy this, paste that right straight into R. So you'll notice I don't have an R window set up yet, so I better go in and click here to RStudio Cloud. We'll get that going. And you need to log in. And I'm going to go ahead and log in with my fake student account. Bring this over here. Okay, there I am. I'm going to open up my class notes. We'll let this open up. It takes it a minute. Okay, here are my class notes. I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to do full screen just yet. And the reason is I'm going to want to go back and forth between my two different tabs, and I'm not as Mac skilled as I should, so it's easier for me just to leave it not full screen. But if you're working in RStudio Cloud, it's probably easiest to make it full screen. But let's go ahead. We're going to come down here and scroll down a little bit. I'm going to get rid of that output by putting that in. I'm going to scroll down in my notes a little bit more. I'll put in a couple of returns, and I'm going to put one hashtag here. And we're going to start about, let's call this getting started with R. Not getting started, getting started. And under that, I'm going to put a double hashtag, and we're going to talk about calculation, commands, and calculations. And I'm going to put a few returns in here, just a few blank lines to make it easier to see what I'm doing. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's come back over here and let's read. And there's several things that you can do. So when we're talking about just putting in commands and calculations, you can read through this. One of the things it's talking about really is actually using the console. All right, so if I just make this bigger and I have this part here that's the console, I'm going to clear from what we did last time and just have a blank thing. And if I come back here, it's saying, okay, well, let's add 10 and 20. Well, we know how to do that. 10 plus 20. And boom, it gives us the answer. All right, that's one way to do that. I want to do that in a way that shows in your notes. So let's go ahead and we'll type in here, an example. Calculation. All right, so let's say we do an example of a calculation, and I can go ahead and put in an R chunk, bing, and let's do 10 plus 20. Now you don't have to worry about the spaces between the pluses. So if I've got 1 0 space plus space 20. That's going to be 10 plus 20. That's equivalent to, getting rid of the spaces. Now, the one thing I can't do is that, because then I have a 1, a 0, and a plus. And you see over here it says I have an error. Right? And if I hover over that, it even tells me what's going on. Unexpected token. What the heck does that mean? No idea. Actually, what it means is you've got that character, that 0, doesn't know what to make of it. So, there we go. It is, though, better form to put like spaces around something like an operator, like a plus. Just makes it a little easier to read. But that's just style. Doesn't matter. All right, and let's go ahead and play that. And boom, 30. So you can put that in the console and do this, or you can put it in a code chunk. It's going to be much more common for you to put things into a code chunk. You're very rarely going to use the console, to be honest with you. All right, so there are some things where we have to be careful with typos. First of all, let's talk about the equal sign. All right, so the equal sign is, let's see. So let's talk about the equals. All right, let's talk about the equal sign. Okay. First thing to note about this is the equal sign, just a single equals in R, is an assignment operator. What does that mean? Well, let me get a new R chunk here. If I put in 10 equals 30, or 10 equals 20, I'm going to get an error. Because it's going to say, well, wait a minute. 10 doesn't equal 20, and I can't put any, and actually what it's saying is 10's not a variable, right? It's not an object that I can put 20 inside of. What it wants to do is it wants to put 20 inside of that. Well, what will work though is equal equal. That's a comparison. If I do that, it says false because 10 does not equal 20. Or another way that I could do this is I could put in something like this. And then it's going to make A equal 20, right? So let's put this here. I'm going to use, so let's talk about equals. The equal sign is an assignment. All right, I'm going to call it operator. And I misspelled it. So I go in there. There we go. Got it spelled right. Basically, it says put whatever's on the right side into whatever's on the left side. I.e., put what's on the right-hand side into what is on the left-hand side. So something like that, like we see here, A equals 20. All right? It is not a comparison. We can do equal equal is a comparison operator. It says, does it equal that? All right, so that's important to note. All right, let me spell that correctly. All right, well, let's keep going. And we can do other things. So 10 minus 20, yada, yada, yada. All right, as I just said, spacing is flexible in some places and in other places not. For example, if we use a function, it's going to look at that whole name to find the function. All right, so in this case, citation gives you all this stuff, tells you about it. But where this, let's see if either of these work. All right, can copy. This is one of the reasons why it's really great to just have the book online. All right, so let's talk about, let's actually make this a heading. We can make this a third level heading. And we can get another third level heading. And we can talk about spaces. Yeah, and spell checking doesn't work so well when it's in the heading. There we go. All right, so there we go. So we're talking about spaces. Let's go ahead and let's try this citation. Does this one work? All right, we'll run that. Yep, that works. We can do boom, 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 boom. Careful there, I put in an extra character. That wouldn't work. So that one works. All right, we get it twice. But this, let me do it right here, won't work. And the reason why it won't work is because it doesn't know what CIT is, and it doesn't know what ATION is. All right, it wants R wants this to all be one word, so that it knows that it's all one word. Okay, so thinking about spaces, these two work, but and I'm going to put in R, the pound sign is a comment, which means it tells it to ignore this. All right, so I'll put this. So this doesn't work. And comments, I can read them and you can read them, but the computer will ignore them. Okay. So there you go. Next. All right. Sometimes it tells you you're not finished. So for example, if it leaves you with a little plus like there, that means you need to keep going. And it can be a little annoying. But for this case, you'd have to go ahead and type the 20 to get your 30, right? Same thing can happen. The most common way this happens is when you forget a parenthesis. And keeping your parentheses together is, well, that can be a challenge. So you just have to watch them carefully. Okay? All right. That pretty much gets us through 3.2. So that's typing our commands to the console or typing them in a code chunk. So next, let's do some simple calculations with R. So doing simple calculations with R, let's keep going. We can add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Now this is a really nice table because this gives us the operation and the operator. So to do addition, we use a plus. To do subtraction, use a minus. Those are pretty straightforward. Multiplication, the asterisk. All right, I think that's pretty straightforward for most of us who've been working with computers for a while. Division is the slash. Okay, that's right under the question mark. And then doing a power or an exponent, that is the caret. These are all pretty standard if you've used Microsoft Excel. They're basically the same as Microsoft Excel. All right. So let's think about taking powers. All right. We could take 5 to the 4th. We could 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. But that's annoying. We can just do 5 to the 4th. All right. And get the same answer. All right. Easy peasy. So here's where it starts to become a little more challenging. We have to do the calculations in the right order. And R to the best of my knowledge, follows the correct order of operations. And that is, well, we've got a little thing here. BEDMAS, however you say that. Brackets, exponents, right? Division, multiplication, addition, subtraction. And when you have things of similar, things of the same level, then you get, you go from left to right. So let's try this. We can start with 1 plus 2 times 4. Well, that equals 9. Why? Because we're going to do the multiplication first and then the addition. All right. But what if we put parentheses around it? So in that case, we do the brackets or the parentheses first, which is 1 plus 2 to get 3 times 4 gives us 12. All right. Or, well, that's the only real way we can do that one. If we come down here and we look at another one, 4 divided by 2 times 3 gives 6. Why does it give 6? So 4 divided by 2 is 2, because we're going to go from left to right, times 3 gives us 6. This is just basic order of operations from high school algebra class. And that R is going to follow them. When in doubt, though, add parentheses. Right, so I know from my use of Excel, I never trust Excel to actually do what it says it's supposed to do. And so I always add parentheses whenever I think I need to, maybe a little more liberally. The problem with adding parentheses, though, is you have to be really careful to keep them matched. Okay. So, like for example, in R, I know this will work, but in Excel, I might be a little bit tempted to put the 2 divided by 4, or the 4 divided by 2 in parentheses. And we can play with that one actually a little bit. So I'm just going to pull up here the, let's do some, one, two, three, order of operations. Trials. And let's make ourselves an R chunk. Bing. And so let's do this 4 divided by 2 plus 3. And I like to put some spaces in there just so it's a little easier to read. Spaces don't matter. You don't have to have them. And we get, plus 3. I'm sorry. Times 3. That's what's in the book. Great. So we get 6. Well, what if we do it like this? 4 divided by 2 times 3. All right, we get 6 as well. But we could do 4 divided by 2 times 3. In that case, all right, we get something different, right? We get 2/3. What's going on? 4 divided by 6, or 2 over 3. One other thing that we could try a little bit differently is 3 times 4 divided by 2. Okay, what would happen if I did that? And we get 6 back again, right? 3 times 4 is 12, divided by 2 is 6. Okay, so there's a few experiments that you can do based on the example in the book. Okay, all right, so let's keep going. All right, now we're going to start really getting to the things that are a little bit more useful. We're going to use the assignment operator. Now, I want you to be very careful with this book because it's typeset in HTML, and notice here how it's just got the less than sign. It doesn't have the dash. It's because less than dash actually means something in HTML, and so every once in a while, when it renders in this textbook environment that we're here, it just doesn't render quite right. So you can think of that basically as a typo. Okay, and I have some highlighting in here. So, and I think I've discussed this. Basically, that's a typo. You should be very careful of that. So what we want to do though is oftentimes we're going to want to store values in a variable of some kind. All right, and sometimes I'll refer to this as an object. And you can think of an object as just a thing. It's like a box, and I can stuff lots of different things in the box. And that's what that object is all about. So in this case, this is actually a scalar. It's not an object. It's just a value. And so we're going to look at that. This arrow is called the assignment operator. And while I told you before equals was an assignment operator and would do assignments, we're really only going to use those in functions. For the most part, we're going to use this arrow as an assignment operator. Now, there is a rhyme and reason to why I use the arrow versus an equal sign, but frankly, you're not going to be able to discern it yet. So we're just not going to worry about it. Just basically, when I tell you to use this, almost all the time. There's just one exception where we really have to use the equal sign, and we'll get to that in a later video. Okay, in the event, so here we are. So we want to store stuff in here. So, well, how do I do that? Say I want to store sales, and it looks like I have 350 million going in there, so I'm going to do 350. How can I do that? Well, let's come in here. Variables. Boom. So let's do sales. And we'll assign to that to 350. Alternatively, I could do 350 and stuff that into sales. And you see the arrow is just telling you the direction that the data is going. So here the data is going from left to right, and in line 73 it's going from right into left. All right. Generally, line 73 is a lot easier to read. I almost never use the form in line 74. You can, it's just I don't very often. And if I run this, boom, I now have a variable over here in my environment called sales that has the value 350 in it. But wait a minute, nothing printed out. Well, that's because the value was sent to sales, not to the display. If I want to print that, I can do it in one of a couple ways. One way is just type it out. All right, and notice RStudio is pretty smart. It has some code completion, and so it knows sales is a value, and I was starting to type it, and so it filled it out for me. If I just type it like that, boom, then it'll display the value. Another way I could do that is I could put that whole line in parentheses. All right, and here's something neat. If I select that line and I type opening parentheses, it'll put the whole line in parentheses for me. I don't have to type the ending parenthesis. That's kind of fun. And if I do that, that will also print it out. So basically, if you want to look cool to your other R people, you do it like line 73. If you don't care and you just want to get it done, you do it like line 75 to print out the data. All right, so what is in sales? Okay, let's keep going. So let's do some calculations with variables. All right, I'm going to go ahead and copy this because I don't want to type it all out. And let's come over here to R and let's do dink dink. calculations with variables. All right, and we'll just go here, and we'll do R, and let's paste that in. All right, so we've stored 350 in sales, 7 in royalty, and let's say, so we get $7 royalty for every book that gets sold. So let's go ahead and find our total by taking sales times royalties. All right, and see, it says I typed it before, so it knows I want that, and let's run that. Bing, 2,450, and we can just verify. If you can't do that in your head, well, that's going to be 21 plus 7 times 5, right? So you could do that in your head, but I can't. So we could do 350 times 7, and bingo, we get the same amount each time. All right. Now, why would I want to do that as opposed to just typing 350 times 7? Well, maybe these numbers change. And if they change, well, it'd be nice to be able to just change the variable, but not have to change the calculation. And so that's what that allows us to do. All right, well, now maybe we want to do this. We want to find our revenue by storing sales times royalty in our revenue. So let's do that. Bing. And then we retype revenue to get it to print out the revenue. And notice now, if I make this a little bigger, I can come right up here and I have a new variable called revenue that has 2,450 in it, and it printed out to the underneath here. So bingo. And it printed out because we retyped the variable name. All right, well, let's keep going. Well, wait a minute. I could multiply revenue plus, some number. I don't know why we want to do that, but you could do that and you get a little bit more. Okay, isn't that cool? All right, so there are some rules and a few conventions about naming variables. Okay, so let's talk about this. First of all, variables can only use uppercase letters, so A to Z, lowercase letters A to Z. You can include numeric characters 0 to 9, the period, and the underscore. Okay, those are what you get to use. You can't use a question mark. All right, that's going to be bad. It's not going to know what to do. All right, variable names can't include spaces because then it wouldn't know that this is all one variable. Now, we're actually going to kind of break that rule a little bit a little later when we get into using data frames. But basic variable names in R or object names can't have spaces in them. But it's very typical in R to use a dot or a period as a space. Now that's weird. If you've had other programming languages, you know that the dot gets used in another way, but not in R. Basically, in R, for the most part, the dot or the period is a substitute for a white space. Right? So instead of my sales, you get my dot sales. Okay. Variable names are case sensitive. So if you have sales here, that's not going to be the same as sales all lowercase. Right? Those are two different variable names. That's easy to mess up. Now here's a quick tip. Pick a convention and go with it. If you capitalize variables, capitalize them and always do it. If you don't capitalize them, always use lowercase. All right. Don't switch back and forth between styles because you're going to drive yourself nuts. All right. You won't remember whether you did a capital S or a lowercase s. So try to do it always the same way. That way you don't have to struggle with it. All right. Next, Variable names must start with a letter or a period. You can't use something like underscore sales. You can use something like dot sales. It's a little weird. Um, um, so by convention, variables starting with a dot are used for special purposes. So don't do that. In general, yeah, that just looks weird to me. So I would avoid doing that unless you really have a reason for doing so. All right, variables cannot be one of the reserved words. And so here's the list of reserved words. Um, Probably the most important ones are going to be true and false. We'll talk about a few of these others later, but there you go. There's a list. That's another reason why you could get a problem with a variable name. All right, in addition to those rules, there are some kind of informal conventions. Number one, use informative variable names like sales or revenue. Using variable one, variable two, X, Y, not so much. Okay, the next one I have trouble with, especially in R. Try to use the shortest variable name you can get away with. Like, for example, sales.for.this.book that.u.r.reading is very, very informative, but it's also a pain in the arse to type every single time you need to use it. So maybe sales.book1 or sales.lsr, learning statistics with R. Those would be good, good variable names. So there's a tension between the two, which oftentimes you end up with longer names. But just try to be as brief as possible. All right. The next thing is, in general, R uses dots, unless it doesn't, and not underscores. So it's probably better, at least we're starting out, to do my dot new dot salary as opposed to my underscore new underscore salary. There are a couple packages that uses underscores. And there's even functions where the difference between the two functions, whether it's the new function or the old function, is the new function has an underscore and the old function has a dot. There's a few things where it's just confusing, but oh well. The final way is you can use this form of variable name where you just capitalize the first letter of each word in the variable. So my capital N new capital S salary. That's also a very common convention. It's not used as much in R. In R, primarily, it's this dot convention, which, to be honest, is a bit weird. Okay, so there is an overview of the first part. So working with commands and calculations and variables in R.